Come on, look at this. Look at this. You see what I'm throwing? We're going to find out it's nothing more than a TV projection later on, but it looks pretty good.
It looks great. Looks very real, but it is.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's nice and warm on a night like this. I think, today it was like at one point it was like 8 degrees.
It was
You know,
tis the season, as we say. Tis
tis
the
the
season.
season. Tis
So
the season.
hello, all those who are out there listening, and here's another conversation with myself, Leilani Izareed, and Leilani Izareed from the Mid-Hudson Problem Gambling Resource Center. I work with the New York Council on Problem Gambling, and I have here with me one of our clinicians, Dr. Larry Force, and we're going to be talking about today intermittent grief and gambling, because it's called Grief and Gambling. It's our conversations, and we try to always come to you with information, casual conversation, and important conversations and important information, but casually speaking about it. So isn't that about
What do we say? Informal but informative.
informal but informative? Yes.
And as we were, ramping up for this discussion,
Yes.
We talk about certain topics, exchange certain topics during the week, which seems to make the most sense, which one we feel as though that we can add the most value to. And we centered on intermittent grief.
Yeah.
And then as we were preparing to even record tonight, we started to talk about, the connection, the word intermittent. So we know that depending upon what school of thought you look at, like a set of eyeglasses, behaviorist versus psychoanalytic, why do people do the things that they do?
Right.
The behaviorists believe that behavior is learned and it can be unlearned. So
Yes.
Looking at it from that perspective, what do we know? Well, there's different forms of reinforcement schedules. So if you get rewarded every time you do something, it's continuous.
And then you're going to continue doing that behavior because you know that something's going to come after it.
Right. But the reality is, and the irony of the whole thing is that the behavior that's learned through a continuous reinforcement method is easier to extinguish, stop, than behavior similar to gambling behavior, known as intermittent behavior. Yes. So continuous reinforcement, you do something, there's going to be a response, continuous. Then there's fixed ratio, fixed interval, variable ratio, variable interval, and then there's intermittent. And intermittent, fixed ratio would be you do something 4 times, 6 times, and you get rewarded. Fixed variable, it's every 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But fixed variable. But the problem is that when you get to the intermittent stuff, you just don't know when it's going to happen. Right. So that's why it's so hard
to stop.
Family members will not impossible, not difficult. You can't use it as an excuse, but you have to have a reality of it.
Right.
It comes, it goes.
It's harder. It's just harder. It's not easier.
Definitely harder. Definitely and harder. There are certain behaviors that only occur randomly across your life, and you can't see them. You can't figure out when they're going to launch and stuff like that. They're harder to address. The intermittent behavior of gambling, it's probably one of the hardest behavior patterns to disrupt.
When I was looking up intermittent grief or intermittent gambling, I came across an article where they described it as they not described it, but they made a correlation with an individual who is in an abusive relationship. Sometimes the relationship could be great, and those are the times where you're happy, the things are going good, but then there's a flip side where it can become really dangerous and abusive. So then you're just hoping and wishing and waiting for that moment to come again where things are good, because when things are great, when things are get going, those are the moments that we want to relish in. But then there is a side where it's not healthy, it's not good, but we're wishing for that one moment again.
Right, and I think, based upon what you're saying, I think for a sense of clarity for both of us, we're not saying that gambling by itself is bad.
Yeah,
You
no,
know,
not by a long shot. We're
we're
not
not
saying
we're not we're not saying that. I mean, we're not running around trying to close down casinos. Or that's not what we're talking about.
right.
It's just that when there's this intersection between sometimes temperament or circumstances or whatever, it can get to the point that it can't be reeled back in.
Right.
And then when it can't be reeled back in, and what we've said in previous podcast, video casts, is families have a tendency to get better slower. So the fact is that, somebody is gambling, you know, typically, what do we find? That there's a pattern of secrecy to it,
Mm-hmm.
if there's family members, and then what happens is that the behavior becomes more clandestine. And then what happens is that, the person kind of like builds a whole thing around. I mean, there's a whole ritual to it, preparing for it. I work with people, and one of the things that we talk about is just because you have the thought doesn't mean you have to execute it,
Right.
And now you and I, because we're talking the behavioral language, are talking thought. Other people would talk about craving.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do when when the thought of behavior comes up? It's like walking, and we've mentioned this before, it's like walking past a bakery, and all of a sudden you smell something that floods you with memories of childhood, you know. And the fact is, all of a sudden you have a thought that you want to involve yourself in some type of behavior that you're trying to remove yourself from, or you don't want to do it anymore. And it takes many forms. It
It
could
does.
be sports betting. I mean, you see this in the role that you have.
I
I mean,
do. And I was trying to think about like something that I've been experiencing lately because I have been doing some work in the Ulster County Jail in regards to talking to the inmates about gambling and what are their perceptions around gambling, and something that I learned um inside the jail. And this could be it could be it can happen outside of the jails and in society. But what happens is if an individual who has is struggling with some type of substance use, and they are incarcerated, they can, because they don't have the access to they don't have the access to their substance in the jail, then they start gambling because that's something that is accessible. So would you consider that some type of intermittent like gambling because or it,
well, yeah. I mean, there's a whole thing about comorbidity. I mean,
yes.
you know that, meaning, if you see one, you're probably going to see the other.
Yes, an
You
addiction
know,
is an
you,
addiction.
right. So you know that if you see an eating disorder, especially in young females, the chances are you're going to see cutting behavior.
Right.
That doesn't mean guaranteed, but there's a good chance that the cousin of eating disorders, cutting behaviors, will be present.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens is that the same type of thing with any type of addictive pattern, because what is it? I mean, it's a change in brain chemistry. It's an adrenaline rush.
Right.
It's dopamine. I mean, we know all of the things that go on and the feeling that you get. I heard a great quote one time from somebody. They said, if you really want to know what a place is like, you should look at the eyes of the people that are leaving it.
Mm.
That's a very powerful insight.
Can you say it again?
If you really want to know what a place is like, look at the eyes, and they said facial expression. Look at the eyes and the facial expression of the people that are leaving it.
So that could be like any person who could be leaving a casino, any person that could be who
A
just lost
racetrack,
like off a
stadium.
racetrack, a scratch, or in a corner store, which is using playing scratch loss, or any person was doing mobile sports betting. It's like it's just if they're looking distraught and like they lost all hope, they lost their money and everything, and frustrated, depressed. Maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but something to take caution to.
Right. But here comes adrenaline. Here comes rush. Here comes, like, I mean, look at the way that, a lot of these venues are created. No
Right.
mirrors, no windows, no clocks, dark, lit up, but lit up with fluorescent lights and stuff like that. I read an article once that the two populations you're going to find the most in casino settings are going to be a younger population and a much older population. Okay, now let's talk about some of the things that go on in those settings. Sometimes it's socialization. We know in places like Vegas, where food venues are, extravagant but cheap, some older people or people that are concerned about socioeconomic, access to monies and stuff like that, go to the casinos to eat.
Right.
Go to the casinos for socialization. I mean, this whole
Casinos
idea
have
of
shopping areas, so they go to shop.
right, and the connections. And then, what do? They lace in, a lot of these places will then lace in the use of alcohol. So now you're impairing judgment, and the fact is that there are pluses to those types of settings, congregate settings, but there's also minuses. And typically what we see, specifically what you see, because you're at the front door, people aren't coming to you to tell you their lives are going so great.
Right.
People are coming to you because they need, or somebody has stepped up on their behalf, or family members raised their hand. They need help.
They need help.
They can't seem to control this behavior, because and many times it's not consistent or continuous, but it's intermittent.
Right.
And the intermittent grieving stuff, also has that some people, when they stop, they feel as though they said goodbye to an old friend. And then from a behavioral perspective, what do you do in its place? I work with a number.
About that before. We've talked about that before in terms of how, like, how do you replace something that is like gambling, and is it, because other conversations I've been in is like the harm reduction. Do you allow people to wean themselves off, or just, do it in intervals, not as much, but maybe you can do a little bit, practicing some type of self-regulation.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, I mean, years ago, when you were in the addiction and recovery arena, 30 years ago as a practitioner, everything was abstinence.
Right.
Everything was abstinence. I overheard a conversation, guy said to another person, "You look different." He said, "Yeah, I joined AA 110 days ago." He said, "But I got high last week and I had a couple drinks, the week before." Now, 30 years ago, the message back to that person would have been, "Well, you're really not sober. What are you doing?" 30 years later, there's a sense of congratulation and support, because you're really trying, and look how different you are. That whole harm reduction.
Right.
I really believe, personally and professionally, abstinence is easier than moderation. It just seems, because like I work with people that have substance abuse things, and they'll tell me, I haven't drank in 6 weeks, and I'll tell them at some point they won't even know the amount of time that they haven't drank, but right now they're counting. They're holding on to it. I mean, they're still, even though they haven't drank, they're still focused on it, because they're still counting the days, that they haven't done it since.
It's similar to what I think is a big craze right now, is like intermittent fasting. People fasting, and then they're fasting, like, whether it's like a certain amount of times in a day that they're not eating, or they're letting go of something, right? And me and my husband, we decided that at the beginning of the new year we were going to do a fast. And I was like, this is not going to be sustainable, because I haven't done a fast in so long. But I was like, I'm going to try. But every single day that I came home, it seemed like, and this is not even a regular occurrence, but every single day I came home, my apartment was filled with different smells of different types of great foods. And it was very triggering.
And it's almost like them yelling, the snack telling, "We've been waiting for you."
Yeah, we've been waiting for you. But that's like similar to individuals who are in recovery. And while like something could just be for the moment, I wonder how long, how lasting it is.
Look, it comes down to, with behavior change, all behavior is learned. It can be unlearned.
Yes.
My example, if I was working with somebody that was going through the same routine, hoping for a different outcome, I would tell them mix it up, disrupt it. So if you have access to a different door when you come home now, come in that way. Once you're in the door, instead of going to the right where you usually go to, take your coat and throw it, someplace or hang it someplace, go to the left. Change it up. Change it up. Not only the actual, focus that you have of whether it be food or substance or whatever, but change it up. Mix it up.
But isn't that going opposite of what, like, because in the beginning we started talking about intermittent fasting and intermittent reinforcement. It's the consistency that helps the individual stay on track. But now you're saying change it up. That would throw somebody off.
There's a Elon Musk talks about sometimes you got to disrupt the space.
Yeah.
And the same type of thing with therapeutic intervention. There's something called, and hear me clearly, this is on tape, so I'm going to be very clear about this. So when people say, did you hear what he said? Yeah, you heard what he said. There's something called paradoxical intervention. So instead of asking the person to stop the behavior, you encourage it. I like that. I like the way it's going now, even though you don't. I really like the way it's going. I like the sound of whatever you're doing. I like the fact that you do it. But you got to be real careful with paradoxical intervention, because unless you know what the end zone is, you could lose control of it. Mm-hmm. Because many people have been in front of therapy, in front of a judge, in front of a police officer saying they're never going to do it again. They're making these deathbed commitments. It's never going to happen at 7 a.m. in the morning. And then we catch up to them at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, they're doing the same thing again. So instead of encouraging the person to stop, the paradoxical intervention would be, you know what? If you're going to do it all out. Do it well. And then the person typically looks at you like, what are you, crazy? Everybody else has told me to stop. That's true. And you've said to everybody else you're going to stop, but you haven't. The thing that families have to understand is if you're not having a good time watching it, that person's not having a good time living it. Mm. And there's nothing that you could say that would be more detrimental to them in comparison to what they're saying to themselves. They're not having a good time. No. It's not like they're applauding and, feeling good about feeling good.
But some people don't even recognize that they're not having a good time. And some of them don't even recognize, especially individuals who are knee deep or they're at the beginning of their addiction, but also halfway, midway, that they don't even recognize that.
I don't know about that. I think that people may deny it. People may become defensive. What are you talking about? I don't have a problem. They have to go to sleep at night with themselves. They have to wake up in the silence of the morning. They know what they're thinking. Ask them what they're thinking. Try to get them to record, which is not going to happen, but ask them to record their thoughts on the way home from a venue where it hasn't gone well, and the things that they're saying to themselves and how they feel about themselves. They're not applauding themselves. They're not congratulating themselves. They're tearing themselves up. This is and I think as we bring this to summary, this is a head game. It's definitely part of a head. There's a behavioral component to it, but it's also a head game. And I think the benefit, and you're not asking me to say this or encouraging me to say this, but let me be very direct. You and your group are a lifeline for some people. Families don't know where else to go. Mm-hmm. They're embarrassed. They don't want to go to the physician. They don't want to go to the priest. They don't want to go to their friend or a relative. And you provide them. And I think people that are listening to this really need to understand this. This is an anonymous relationship.
Yes, it is. Any call that we receive, it is anonymous. And not even individuals whose loved one calls for them can gain access to whatever that individual's care is. Care and
support. Right. And this is something that people address all the way through the lifespan, whether it be, the person that's 16 or the person that's 86, 90 and beyond. All right. So do I have time to throw another log in the fire, or that's it?
I think that's it for today. I think we talked a good amount of time about intermittent gambling and grief and how grief plays a part, because grief just plays a part in everyday life. It's the remembrance. Grief is all about remembering what was the death of something, and sometimes we can get caught up. Sometimes the remembrance can get us caught up in an activity that we may not want to participate in. And
And I have to tell you, I teach a psychology of death and dying class now for years. And one of the things I say to the students is people live uniquely, people die uniquely, and people grieve uniquely.
yes, they do.
And that's what we have to, be aware of in either with a family member or working, with a professional, as a professional with a client. The most predictable thing about human behavior is that it's unpredictable, especially in the grief arena.
I saw a quote today, and it said, long after the shock, grief will remind us.
Powerful. Powerful. Very powerful. I like that.
Long after the shock.
Now listen, you challenged me to say that thing again. So let me say to you, we share that with us again, because those are powerful words.
Yeah. Long after the shock, grief will remind us.
Love it.
So I hope we remember that in our recovery or our journey into recovery. And I listened to it, I read it several times, and I said to myself, it's interesting when people are entering into recoveries, because the shock and the excitement has worn off, with their addiction, with the gambling habit. And now it's just reminding us that we need help, we need support, and it's time.
And you don't, right. And I think what we represent is people don't have to do it alone.
Nobody has to do it alone.
Nobody
has to do it alone. So
great. As always, thank you for hosting this. Wonderful job.
Thank you.
And we'll see everybody next time.
On the next one. Maybe with some with a different setting. Last time it was the.
Or maybe I'll have like marshmallows. Next time I'll bring marshmallows and toast marshmallows.
We could only hope.
I know. Tell me about it. All right. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you again, Leilani.